Hi, I'm Bob. Today we're going to talk about basic seed saving with Seeds of Diversity. Seeds of Diversity is a national organization of seed savers. We have gardeners all across the country who save many, many kinds of seeds, and the purpose of saving seeds is to preserve rare varieties that would die out if nobody were growing them. We talk about basic seed saving. We also talk about advanced seed saving for people who are involved in farm scale seed production or growing seeds for seed banks. Seed saving is kind of like playing the piano. You can learn something easy and work your way up to something hard. And today we're just going to talk about the easy things for you to get started. The very simplest things about saving seeds is to get seeds that germinate well, which means they grow when you plant them, and also seeds that grow into the plants that you expect. If you had a seed that you thought would grow into a zucchini, and when you planted it, it grew into a pumpkin, then that might be disappointing. Well, these are really, when you think about it, the only two things that really matter with seeds, that they grow and they grow into what you want them to. For seeds to germinate well, we need three things. We have to harvest the seeds when they're ripe, and that means they're ripe on the plant, not just that you've harvested them too early and left them on a windowsill to ripen. That doesn't work. They need to ripen on the plant. You also will clean the seeds and dry them properly so that they can last when they're stored, and you'll store them nice and dry. I'll probably say this many times. Store your seeds dry. That's the most important thing. To get your seeds to grow into the plants you expect, the main thing is to prevent them from cross-pollinating with other kinds of plants. We'll talk about how to do that too. How do you know when your seeds are ripe? You want them to grow on the plant and harvest them when they're fully mature. The reason is that every seed has a little baby plant inside of it, and that plant inside the seed has some food stored up too. When the food runs out, the little plant inside the seed will die. So the really important thing about growing seeds is to make sure that the seeds are fully mature, they have lots of food stored in there, and then your seed will last for a long time. You know this is true for about 90% of our plants when the seeds are dry and brown. Think about flowers. After the flower has grown and they produce a dry brown seed head, think about beans that start off with maybe a green pod or a yellow pod, but later on the pod turns brown and dry. Think about other kinds of plants that you've seen, herbs, or maybe that you haven't seen, like lettuce seeds. These are lettuce seeds in the picture over on the right. A smaller number of plants have seeds that are in a soft fruit, so tomatoes or melons or peppers. And in those cases, we're normally looking for the seeds from ripe fruit at the point where you'd normally eat it. So here are some examples. In the vast majority of seeds that come in a dry brown pod or a husk or maybe a flower head, you're looking for them to be nice and dry and brown. And we have some beans here in different stages. There are some that are too soft, too green. They're not ready yet. Some of them are dry and brown. We'll pick those and take the seeds from them. And the other kinds of plants that have seeds that are in soft fruit, like this tomato, we normally wait for the fruit to be fully ripe at the point where you try to eat it. So a nice ripe melon, nice ripe tomato. It's a little bit different for some plants. Green peppers, for example, are actually underripe. So they're not ready. You have to wait for them to turn into red peppers. 95% of the time, we are dealing with seeds that come in a dry brown pod or a seed head. It's very simple. Somewhere in that pile of little bits of pieces of plant, some of those bits of pieces are flowers, some of the little bits are stems, but there are seeds in there too. And you've harvested those from the seed heads, and now you have to separate the seeds out from all the chaff. You can do this using a screen. You can do this using a little bit of air. There are lots of ways to do it, and we have other videos on how to clean your seeds. If the seed comes from a fleshy fruit, like a melon or like a tomato, you take the seeds out and rinse them off. Usually they have a little bit of sugary juice on them, so they'll stick together if you don't rinse them, but then let them dry. The most important thing is to dry them because that's how you have to store them. Here are some of the ways that we'll clean The 95% of our seeds that are flowers or herbs or beans, you see the little tiny seeds, you see the larger seeds. Often they come with some chaff around them. Might be little bits of leaves, or it might be little bits of flowers. My favorite thing is to use a whole assortment of different screens. Some screens have big holes that helps you get the chaff off of the large seeds. Some screens have little tiny holes, and that helps you with the flowers. So a good seed saver will have lots of different kinds of screens, because that is a really helpful thing to have. In the 5% of our seeds that come out of fleshy fruit, the main thing is to squeeze the seeds out. It helps to have a little bit of water handy to do that. But once you get the seeds out of the fruit, the most important thing is to rinse them and then dry them, because they will sprout if you leave them wet. Let them dry on a nice flat surface with lots of air available to them. They don't have to be heated, but it does help to have a little bit of ventilation so the air moves around. And once the seeds are dry, then they're ready to keep, and you can plant them later on. Here's a little trick. Sometimes you'll find some seeds that just look a little small. They don't seem to have really formed the same way as all the other seeds did. And that's true. They probably didn't get pollinated, or they didn't get the food that they needed to grow. And if you can remove those little seeds, then it actually increases the germination rate of the seeds, because you're getting rid of the ones that won't grow. You don't have to do this, but if some of those happen to get away from you while you're cleaning them, don't worry, because they wouldn't have grown anyway. Those seeds will blow away more easily than the others. That's not a problem, because they wouldn't have grown anyway. And those seeds will float away if you have them in water, and that's okay. You can just tip the water off, let those seeds go into the compost, and don't worry, because they weren't going to grow anyway. When you store your seeds, make sure they're dry. And if you can, make sure they're cold. The most important thing is to keep them dry. And if you can keep them dry, then also keeping them cold will make them last longer too. And here's just a little bit of an idea of how much of a difference it makes. If you store your seeds in a humid place, like in the fridge, that's very humid, or in a basement where it's wet, or maybe in a garage where it's often wet, then the line over on the left shows the germination rate of those seeds. It falls really fast. And after only a few years are the numbers along the bottom, the seeds won't grow anymore. But if you keep your seeds dry and cold, then the line on the right shows how they can last for years and years and years. It makes that much difference. It's just the humidity of the air where you keep your seeds. Once your seeds are fully dry, you can put them in a jar. And that's great, because then you can put the jar in a humid place, like a fridge or a basement or a garage. And as long as the air inside the jar is dry, then the seeds will stay dry. But don't put the seeds in the jar before they're fully dry, or else they can mold. So we talked about how we can keep our seeds, how we can make them germinate. Well, we harvest them when they're fully ripe, and we clean them, and we make sure they're fully dry, and then we store them someplace where they'll stay dry. How do we get our seeds to grow into the plants that we expect? Well, it's about pollination. And this is a very quick overview. There are 3 different kinds of pollination. Some plants, like these tomato flowers, will pollinate themselves. Some plants, like the squash flower in the middle, has to be pollinated by insects. And other kinds of plants, like this corn plant, will be pollinated by pollen blowing in the wind. The main thing that we're talking about with basic seed saving are the plants that self-pollinate. These are tomato flowers over on the left, and in the middle, we have a tomato flower with a bumblebee, and over on the right is a pea flower. The 3 that we talk about are tomatoes and beans with peas together, and lettuce. So those are self-pollinating vegetable plants, which means that you can plant different kinds of tomatoes pretty close together, and they won't cross-pollinate. You can have different kinds of beans close together, and they won't pollinate or cross-pollinate. And you can have different kinds of lettuce pretty close together, and they won't cross-pollinate, because these are 4 kinds of self-pollinating plants. The bee in the middle, by the way, is a bumblebee who's shaking that tomato flower to get the pollen out, just like you'd shake salt out of a salt shaker. The tomato flower is all closed up, and everything that goes on with the pollination happens inside that flower. The bee can't carry pollen from one tomato flower to another because the flower is all closed up, except for one tiny hole at the end of that cone. And she's shaking the flower to try to get some pollen out, but she can't shake the pollen up into the flower, which would cross-pollinate it, any more than you could get salt to shake up into a salt shaker. Other kinds of flowers are wide open, and that means bees can get right inside and they can carry pollen from one flower to another. So that means, like with these squash flowers, different kinds of squash growing anywhere near each other can easily get cross-pollinated by insects. So we won't cover this in this video. This is a more advanced topic to prevent cross-pollination of squash or other flowers that have wide open petals. And then finally, some plants are cross-pollinated by wind. A lot of grains are. Corn is a grain. That's the plant over on the right. The plant on the left you might not recognize. It's spinach. And it makes two kinds of flowers. The one on the left is the kind of flower that only makes seeds. It doesn't make pollen. And the sort of brownish plant on the right is a kind of spinach that only makes pollen. It doesn't make any seeds. So the pollen blows around on the wind, and that fertilizes the seeds and makes them grow. That means if you have different kinds of spinach in different or in nearby gardens, then they will be easily cross-pollinated by the wind. So that's another topic. For now, we're just going to talk about the self-pollinating vegetables. Down at the bottom, we prevent cross-pollination with other varieties, and the easy way to do that is just for now to stick with self-pollinating vegetables, tomatoes, beans, peas, lettuce. They're easy. So what about flowers? Remember how I said we have to wait for the seeds to be brown and dry, and that's true with just about all of our flowers. Calendula is a wonderful, wonderful flower. It's very easy to grow. It's very easy to save the seeds too. Here's what they look like after the yellow flowers go away. They start with a kind of a green bunch of little curlicue things, and those eventually turn into brown curlicue things. Which of these are ripe seeds? The brown and dry ones. Wait for that. Wait for them to be brown and dry, because if you try to plant the green ones, they won't grow. Harvest these brown seeds, and you'll have great success. Here's another example of what the calendula flower looks like. It's green seeds that aren't ready yet, and the brown seeds that are perfectly ready. Zinnias are wonderful plants, also really easy for seed saving. Here's a handful of a brown seed head from a zinnia. Can you find the seeds in there? They look like little arrowheads. Now, if you're not sure what's the seed and what isn't, you don't have to separate the seeds from the chaff. You can just keep all of this and plant it next spring, and the seeds will know what to do. The rest of it will just turn into compost in the ground. If you're not sure, don't worry about it. You can just keep the whole thing. What about beans? Remember beans? We said that they have to be brown and dry in pods on the plant. You can't just pick the green pods and let them dry out. They'll shrivel up, and you'll find that there's really not much to the seed at this point. Only when the pods are brown and dry, that's when the seeds are ready, and that's when they will look like this when you crack them open. Fully formed, nice hard seeds. Every seed has a little baby bean plant inside. So we'll keep them someplace where they'll stay dry, because that keeps them, it actually makes them hibernate so that they will eat their food slower and they last longer. But we're going to put them in a paper bag at first. I would love to put these in a glass jar later on so they can stay dry, but only if they're fully dry first. So I normally put them in a paper bag and let them dry in there because the paper bag can breathe. And then after about 3 months, I usually wait until about the middle of winter, then it's a good time to put them in a glass jar. And then that glass jar can go in any humid place you want because the air and the seeds inside are nice and dry. What about tomatoes? Tomatoes are a little different. First of all, we wait until the fruit has fully formed and fully ripened so that it's the time to eat the tomato, and that's when the seeds have also fully formed and fully ripened. But you notice every seed of a tomato has a kind of a jelly around it. We need to remove that jelly because it stops the seed from germinating. All I've done here in this picture is just rub the seeds between my fingers and gotten the jelly off, and that's fine. Put those seeds in a nice dry place, keep them until next year, and they will grow really, really well. But if you have lots and lots of tomato seeds, here's a trick. Squeeze the seeds and the pulp out into a container. I'm keeping the outside after I've squeezed the seeds and putting that in my freezer so that I can eat the rest of the tomato. You don't have to sacrifice the tomato just to get the seeds out. But leave the seeds in this container for 3 days. At room temperature, they'll go gross. It smells kind of terrible and it looks even worse. But it takes all of that jelly off of the seeds. It just rots off, and you can easily pour away the pulp, and nice clean seeds will be left behind. A few rinses, and the seeds are perfectly clean. It's much, much easier than rubbing each seed with your fingers or with a towel. And with a little bit of squeezing and going through a strainer, you can get the seeds absolutely perfectly clean, and then make sure you dry them. Most important thing at this point is to label them too. If you have more than one kind of tomato, I can't tell the difference from one tomato seed or another. Sometimes I can tell different kinds of beans because they look different, but tomato seeds, remember to label them. If you forget which one it is, you'll never figure it out otherwise. And that is basic seed saving. I would like to thank you for your time with this video, and I invite you to check out our website, seeds.ca. We have lots more information about seed saving, about some of the advanced topics that we didn't cover here, and also where you can get seeds from our seed finder, through our seed exchange, and also you can learn lots about other seed saving efforts that are happening around the country. Thank you very much.